Welcome to another episode of Full and Thriving, the podcast that explores all things wellness, mental health, and thriving in life. I'm your host, Meg McCabe, a certified life coach, recovery coach, community founder, and speaker who has spent the last decade helping other people reach mental healing and build a better life for themselves. Today's episode tackles a critical issue in fitness culture: eating disorders and disordered exercise. We're joined by Brittany Lauro, a licensed clinical social worker and clinical supervisor at Equip, a leading virtual eating disorder treatment program. She's also a former fitness instructor who brings a unique and powerful perspective on how these harmful behaviors manifest in gym settings. Brittany shares her own experiences from inside the industry, uncovering the signs of disordered eating and excessive exercise that can go unnoticed in gym environments. We'll also dive into the toxic fitness culture mentalities like the burn to earn and no days off mindsets, and how these can actually perpetuate unhealthy habits. Whether you're a fitness professional or gym goer or simply curious about the connection between fitness and eating disorders, this episode is packed with eye-opening insights and practical advice for fostering a healthier, more balanced approach to exercise. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this deep dive into eating disorders at the gym. Hi, Brittany. Welcome to Full and Thriving. How are you today?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so happy you're here. Where are you recording from today?
I'm recording from New York on Long Island.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you're on the Northeast like I am. I'm in Connecticut. So that's nice to hear. I love Long Island in the summer. So great.
It's a good place in the summer for sure.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much for joining me today. We have a really fascinating topic related to eating disorders in the gym environment. I think fitness culture has a massive impact on individuals with their relationship with food and body. And I can't wait to dive into all of that with you. But before we do so, I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit. If you could please share a bit about your personal and professional background, I'd love to hear it.
Sure. So I'm currently working as a clinical supervisor for Equip Health, which is one of the leading virtual evidence-based treatment companies that focus on eating disorders. We treat folks across the entire lifespan. And it's really cool that we're expanding we're actually in all states currently, but we are continuing to expand our access with insurance. So really grateful to be at Equip Health. I would say I've spent probably a bit longer than the last decade specializing in the treatment of eating disorders, fully licensed professionally. And then prior to that, I worked in a number of different jobs, but the most consistent was really in the fitness and health and wellness industry, mainly as a fitness instructor. I did find myself in an opportunity to design a health and wellness program for a university that ended up being not only for the student, but it was absorbed by their human resources department as part of their benefits package. So that is really where much of my time was spent before going into the field of psychotherapy and then eventually eating disorders.
Wow, that is really interesting. And I do feel like there might be a connection there because, as we both know, fitness culture, there is a little bit of toxicity in there when it comes to food and bodies. And so I would love for you to share, what was it like being in a fitness environment 24/7 with your career? What were the benefits of being in that role? And what were some of the dark sides that you experienced?
Absolutely. And I will say, I think it is part of the reason why I got into the field of eating disorders. It sparked my initial interest. I mean, growing up, I danced. I was a dancer and then a dance teacher. And so it naturally flowed into being the fitness instructor. And I was curious as like the more time passed, that toxicity that you're talking about, I really started to see it and start questioning, wait a minute, what's going on here? There's almost this like irony of this focus on health and wellness, and yet the messaging and what's actually happening is quite the opposite of that in many cases. And so Oh, where to begin? I would say I had positive and negative experiences in the industry. On the plus side, some settings were really supportive. It was a group of people to kind of come together. You got to know folks who were in your classes. You got to know your colleagues. It really fostered a lot of connection. But the flip side was, and I especially saw differences depending on which gyms I was working at the time, so much commentary about body image in a very negative way, so much commentary about eating, lots of rules, lots of all or nothing, lots of good food versus bad food. I have this like core memory of I was in college at the time and I was working at a gym, and one of the individuals who was running the gym was making a lot of comments about a certain part of the body that it had never crossed my mind to be concerned about that part of the body. And then they related it to preparing for the wedding. I feel like there's a lot of this like sweating for the wedding culture that happens. And that was really striking to me because I was like, oh, like, is that something I should be concerned about? And so not only was it discussed, like it was then marketed as part of this. And, that really, if I look back, was probably one of the first times where I was like, something feels a little bit off here.
Wow. Yeah. So it sounds like there was a bit of an impact on yourself as well when you were in that environment. How did you handle that?
Absolutely. I think it was honestly like really confusing because there were times, I think with most people, and there's like a statistic, there's like some certain percentage of normalcy to focus on one's appearance. And so like I've always had that. And especially being a dancer, there was always a certain focus on appearance. But it wasn't until I got into this fitness industry that I like started questioning, wait, should I be concerned about that part of my body? And I would find myself like occasion, like looking at certain parts of my body a little bit more in a different way. I mean, a lot of the classes that I taught, similar to dance, or in front of a mirror all day, it just brought a lot of additional focus. And I think for me, the greater profound impact was actually in the eating habits that were normalized. I mean, I'm somebody who I think I naturally always ate like a pretty wide variety of foods. I definitely have a natural preference for highly palatable foods. I love like cookies and baked goods and
Me too.
Right? They're the best, especially being in New York. I mean, pizza and bagels, come on, like absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
But my favorite foods were being villainized. And I remember having conversations with folks and I'd be like, yeah, I eat ice cream every day. And they were like, you what? It was like this groundbreaking, horrific thing that I was doing. And I was like, I've never had a problem with this before. Like, why is ice cream an issue? And, I don't know if we'll go in this direction with the conversation today, but one of the biggest impacts on me was my whole life. I've had various health challenges that kind of like remained as this mystery diagnosis, honestly, until more recent years, I discovered what that was. But because I was in the industry, there were so many individuals who were very quick to suggest like dietary modifications. And I bought into that. I was desperate to find a change, to find healing. And what ended up happening, I would later discover after going through a series of very invasive tests, was the choices that I was being highly encouraged to make while I was working in the fitness industry were actually harming my body more. For example, like fresh fruits and vegetables, there were so much emphasis on this at the time. And I was being told like, this should be the staple of your diet and you should cut out this other thing and this other thing. And it actually turned out that for me and this condition that I would come to discover, those were actually causing more problems. So I didn't know that for a 10-year period. And, my colleagues were touting all of these, I would call them diets, lifestyle changes, however you'd like to look at that truly are not one size fits all.
Right. That's such a good point. I think so many of us are quick to jump on the trends and what our friends or our colleagues are talking about. And it's easy to convince yourself in the moment, this is totally what I should be doing right now. Because this is what everyone's, if you're in gym culture, maybe they're all seeing the results that they are hoping for. So you jump on the bandwagon without realizing that everybody's unique and has different needs. So you really experienced this like conflict almost of doing something in the name of health but it was actually harming your body.
100%. Absolutely.
Wow.
And I unfortunately wouldn't come to learn that until years later on when I was finally ready to take the plunge for that extensive and invasive testing. And that flowed into my classes, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, I think for me, a lot of the focus was on health and healing. And I was in environments where we were steeped in profiting from diet culture. People were coming to us because they wanted their bodies to look a certain way. And a lot of what we were learning with either focuses in fitness classes or when my colleagues would speak to the nutritional piece, I was less directly involved in that. But it did flow into this because there was this overlap of like, oh, if you want to look a certain way, well, guess what? This lifestyle change is actually going to fix that too. It was almost like a cure-all. So I found myself not only kind of absorbing that for my own curiosity of health, but also this is what the industry is. This is what we were. And I think at the time, many of us genuinely believed this was like in the best interest of health for everyone. And if it's got a side effect of helping you look the way you'd like to look, then like, that's just wonderful. And that was the mindset.
Wow. Yeah. It reminds me of when people have eating disorders and we ask them what their values are. And, there's a part of them that genuinely values health. And then the eating disorder also values health. But the health is like this contrived version of health that's really not healthy when you look at the big picture. And that's what the eating disorder is promoting. And I'm getting that kind of messaging through your story here is like people were working in the name of health, but not exactly healthy as a whole.
100%. And that ran so deep in various places I worked. And I honestly started questioning it and getting curious about it. I went out on a limb. Again, this is during like my college and grad school years. I went out on a limb and I was now in a place where I was ready to leave one of the gyms that I felt was not aligned with true health. And I reached out to the director of intramurals at my university and I said, hey, what do you think about offering some fitness classes? And he said, that sounds interesting. Let's talk about it. It was interesting. I found myself in a room in a highly male dominated space. And I was like, hey, I have these ideas. And I was asked, oh, do you want to direct the Biggest Loser program? And to set the tone a little bit, this is, coming off of the 90s, coming off of the heroin chic. And when the Biggest Loser was like the hot new thing on TV. So it was like, why not do that? And I was like, okay, I'm starting to recognize that I'm in a very unique space here. I'm often like the only female in the space. At the beginning, we did have more colleagues of all genders join in, which was amazing. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that. And I was like, how do I tread this lightly? And I would agree to participate. I would slowly start integrating things. And I am so grateful for my boss at the time. His name is John Castone. If you're watching this, John, I owe so much to you. Who really took an interest in what I had to say and took an interest in thinking about things differently. So we were able to depart from what you saw on the Biggest Loser show. We were able to kind of strategically start changing the focus of the group. So instead of changing one's shape and weight, it was more so about following a regular pattern of eating. And again, this is a little bit before the time of the MyFitnessPal boom. We didn't really have that level of technology yet. But we did start getting curious about doing things a little bit differently. And I'm grateful for that because it opened up a bigger conversation. And that program eventually moved into, we renamed it as the Health and Wellness Program, ironically. Still had many elements of diet culture, which I'll be honest with you, I didn't recognize until I worked professionally in the field of eating disorders. But it was, in my opinion, a little bit ahead of its time. It was starting to challenge some of those norms. And I was just so grateful for that space because I could be, if I'm being honest with you, not many spaces would be open to that. It doesn't really align with, at the time, the main goals of the other sorts of organizations.
Wow. So first of all, I love this part of your story. For people who aren't old enough to know what the Biggest Loser is, could you share what that is or what that was? Because I definitely watched it growing up, but yeah. I would love to maybe make sure everyone's on the same page.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for that, Colin. The Biggest Loser was this popular show on TV. And this is before, the era of Netflix as we know it. So it was like the thing that a certain night of the week you would sit down with your family and you would watch. And it was basically a competition show of who would lose the most weight, and whoever lost the most weight had this like radical transformation, which was all appearance based, in my opinion. This was the goal of the show, and you won a prize, and there were all these accolades. So that was kind of like the hot topic. There were many product spin-offs from this show. I remember like Jillian Michaels was one of the trainers on the show, and there were just so many products that were now sold in stores. So you could start your own Biggest Loser journey. So it was really this hyper-focused era on weight loss, and that, literally being the point of this competition.
Like thinking back to that show, it was absolutely disgusting the way they treated people in larger bodies on that show and just dehumanized those individuals to an
100%.
extreme level. So much weight stigma. Oh man, I would be livid if I watched that show now, but it goes to show how ingrained this mindset was back in those days.
Yep.
And so bringing it back to your journey here, you mentioned that you had been questioning fitness culture and diet culture at your gym. And then you had this amazing boss who was open to talking to you about your ideas. At that point, what were you bringing up to him? Because I know we didn't have like the, fat acceptance movement or the, I think health at every size wasn't very known back then. And, all of these movements weren't there. So how did you articulate this to him?
I think I just kind of like brought my curiosities into the conversation, and there was a little bit more information about eating disorders coming out. I think there was like an episode of Dr. Oz that had another show that was popular during that time that had talked about eating disorders. So there was a little bit more, I guess, traction for conversation. And I remember sitting down and asking him, well, when you design these programs, what are you going to do about the people with eating disorders? And he's like, well, how do you know they have eating disorders? Which is also curious, right? Because that's a fair question. You literally cannot tell by looking at someone if they have an eating disorder or not. We know that for a fact. So I appreciate that conversation. And yet I started questioning a lot of these patterns that I would see in my industry, like the no days off, pain is weakness leaving the body. Again, all of this all or nothing thinking. And so that's how we opened the conversation. And we ultimately decided two things. One, we wanted to step away from the body image weight loss focus and focus more so overall health, which I will say, even to this day, I think it's good practice to always be learning about. So we focused more so on overall health. We were stepping away from an actual like weight loss base. We wanted to get curious about each individual's goals. We wanted to step away from the villainization of food, especially in a college environment. And the other thing was, I wasn't a licensed professional at the time. I'm working with folks who are not in a therapy industry. So we decided to partner with the counseling and psychological services. So if we did start noticing patterns, we could like make suggestions that folks reach out, or if we, we had hoped that this would never happen, but if it did, if there was an emergency, like we could alert, hey, this is what's going on. We're really worried about this person.
I really admire younger you for taking initiative on something that you saw was a problem, but maybe you weren't necessarily totally trained or informed, but you brought on other professionals and like started to make a difference right away. I
Thank you.
Love young and ambitious people for making change. And I think that's definitely part of this story. So I want to acknowledge that. You mentioned, bringing up eating disorders. I assume you saw this at the gym you used to work at or the multiple gyms. Could you share when you were working in those environments, specifically, what were the signs and that you could see where people were struggling with food or body image in those environments?
I think every person who walked in the door was struggling with food and body image. What I diagnose everybody with an eating disorder? No. But there were specific patterns that I started to see. And this is going to really speak to the fact that like eating disorders don't have one appearance, right? It's not just one type of person, it's anyone. And the patterns that I noticed, and I will preface this by saying I'm a recovering workaholic myself. So I spent quite a lot of time at work picking up extra hours, really just leading into like hustle culture. But I would notice there were certain individuals who were at the gym multiple times a day. They were consistent every single day. Some of them were what you would consider like the top performers in a class, the folks who were like most committed, the nose days off folks. And, I started just kind of noticing, hey, like there's so-and-so again. And no, there's another person again. And like, we're all here at the same day, at the same time, like literally every day, 6-7 days a week. And I did actually learn some of those individuals actually did choose to more publicly disclose their journey with an eating disorder. So I guess you could say like my observation was kind of consistent with what was later revealed. But that's something I think about often now. And like what I would tell my colleagues from that field, like if they're ever curious, it's like the folks that stay curious are your folks who are incredibly committed and devoted to this. There's just that, we talk about like temperament styles with eating disorders. There's oftentimes that temperament style, that drive, if you want to use a technical term, it's like the marginalization of other areas of life, which means like when the eating disorder is active, nothing much else matters. And that kind of allows you to be super consistent and high achieving.
So that was your biggest red flag, was this essential no days off mentality. What else were you seeing in the gym that kind of was a red flag for eating disorders? I'm asking this because I'm hopeful that other people can start to maybe spot and question potential issues in their own fitness environments.
Definitely. And I guess one thing that would be helpful for folks to think about is when I say no days off, like there's a little bit more to that, right? So
okay.
I think of this in a comparable mindset of like using of certain substances. There's this mindset of like, if you're using it and you could just stop any day for any reason and you're not anxious about this and you could get on with life, it's not an issue. But if you're finding on the days, in this case, on the days where you're missing a workout for whatever reason, or you're taking a day off, if you're feeling really guilty or anxious about that, it's probably an issue that is not normal. And so that's where I would start, right? Because I think that there are some people who really do genuinely have lifestyles that have a lot of fitness in them and a lot of like attendance of classes or just being present in the gym. And those are the people who could still take off time, to go to a birthday party, to not think about it. Those are the people who could still honor their body and recognizing like the need for rest and recovery. What I would like folks to know is that if you're getting anxious about missing a day or if you're feeling a profound amount of guilt, that's when we need to start looking into things a little bit more.
That's such a good point, and a really strong indicator that, this is impacting your mental wellness as well. I remember when I had an eating disorder, it's actually funny. Zumba was very intertwined. Were you a Zumba instructor?
I was for a little while. Yeah.
I was a Zumba fiend. Like Zumba was my class, and I would absolutely engage in disordered exercise where I would try to go to every single class, and I would have that extreme guilt if I did not go. And one thing that I, think is common, that was something I struggled with as well, was not nourishing properly before or after the exercise.
Absolutely. And I think that's the other piece, right? Is there is this like rigidity or a significant level of commitment to the physical exercise, but that flows over to eating. And so that's what we started seeing in the health and wellness programs too, was like there were folks who were just not eating throughout the day. There were certain thoughts about like, I should not eat before my workout, or I could only eat if my body does this specific thing at this specific time, then that indicates I have earned my meal. There's a lot of that. There was so much of this all or nothing thinking about foods, good foods versus bad foods, and the level of commitment to that, again, kind of using that like birthday party example is like, if you, maybe you are choosing to eat a certain way, can you still go to the party and have cake? and not think much about it? If the answer is yes, all right, maybe it's not getting in the way of your life. If you're going to this party and again, you're feeling anxious, you're this profound amount of guilt about the cake, like that's when we need to have conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always say that eating disorder is like an emotional roller coaster. There's just emotions coming through for very technically neutral circumstances, like eating certain foods or going to birthday parties or socializing or a colleague bringing in like a snack at work, like all of those things that are very neutral, like technically become emotional experiences. And in my mind, this is a huge red flag.
100%. That reminds me of this one year we were doing preparation for Thanksgiving. There was like a program around preparing for the holidays. And I feel like there's so much of that, honestly, even still in society of like, oh no, the holidays are going to be the winter holidays, like the end of the world. And I remember those conversations and even myself at the time, like being part of the promotion of those conversations of like, okay, let's strategize your day. Like, let's fit in a workout here. Let's fit in a workout there. I remember there was this trend of like, if you're in a place where you can't really work out, what exercises can you do in a bathroom? Which now I think is just such a really bizarre thing. But at the time it was so normalized. It was like, oh my gosh, get in the workout however you can. Like you have to earn your food for this day. And lots of conversations about, bringing extra containers. And that's where I think the kernel of truth was like starting to surface, right? This idea of like, wait, you can have these foods not just on Thanksgiving, you can have them throughout the year. So I think there was like that kernel of truth that was starting to flourish, but it came out in such a way that was like still promoting so much diet culture disguised as wellness.
Yes, well, absolutely. The stuff that we've seen is probably so ridiculous. Like looking back, I'm so glad things are evolving.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's just very interesting to see where it used to be in terms of the extremes that people were undergoing to like maintain this level of fitness. And it was toxic. So
100%, 100%. It definitely has come a long way. And I also, we know eating disorders shapeshift, right? And I think the culture in the industry has shapeshifted a little bit as well. I think some of those elements are still there, just under a disguise of a different name or a slightly different method.
Yeah. I know you're not actively in that field, the gym culture world anymore, but can you name any of those more modern lifestyle changes that might actually be disordered for people who are like in the midst of fitness culture today?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think of, we were just talking about holidays. I still think that there's a lot around holidays and life events. We mentioned the sweating for the wedding culture. I think that is not really the most helpful. I've heard so many stories of folks with and without eating disorders, like focusing a lot on their workout regimen, even the day of the wedding or on honeymoon or something like that. It's just still there during a major life event. Other than that, I hear and I've learned a lot about various programs that are highly competition based. And I think there are some, natural temperament styles that might do well with that and thrive. And I think that there are some folks who might be really vulnerable to that competitive aspect. Again, kind of that like, we have to do this to qualify for this, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that has vulnerability to take on a life of its own. But if I'm being honest with you, what I see more so now is actually less about the exercise per se. It's more about the conversation about food and health and good food versus bad food. And it's a really complex and nuanced conversation because I think that there are certain realities with, our food supply and things that are happening. And also there's still this sort of one size fits all, eat this way for all health problems, which is absolutely not the case. And there's just, I think there's still this like departure from science in a way. I feel like when I think about health and wellness and fitness and even conversations about body size, this is like the only industry where the technical term is like correlation does not equal causation, right? So this is an industry where we're saying like, oh no, this definitely causes this, or people will use like the O word and say that your body weight is actually what is causing this condition. And if you do a deep dive into the research on that, it's actually more of a correlation than it is a causation. And there are other ways to achieve certain markers of health that don't have to do with weight, but that gets lost in the conversation. So for me, what I'm seeing more of lately seems to be the conversations around eating and food, though I do recognize they're still present. And I'm sure if I was in those spaces more, I would know even more about what's happening with like the physical workout element.
So to clarify, like using food as like the cure-all for your health issues, is that kind of what you're seeing more of, like eating this way to improve this piece
Exactly. Exactly. I think, right, there's kernels of truth in nearly everything. And I think that there is a lot of ways that eating could be genuinely health promoting. But what's happening is that, that's sort of like the blanket statement. Then we look into it more. It's actually a pathway to pretty significant dietary restriction that creeps in over time. And I know we see this with eating disorders, that like it starts out with one thing and it snowballs, but I'm starting to see this more and more with individuals who, are not presenting to me in a professional space. These are folks who maybe have not had an eating disorder in the past. And it's just this kind of snowball effect of like more and more restriction and rules. And that's the part that worries me. Is there's no room for the middle ground. There's no room for that sometime. And to be clear, this is not involving, anaphylaxis, immediately life-threatening conditions. This is more so some other situations that I think folks are looking for solutions for.
One thing that I feel like is hot right now in the fitness space is the idea of longevity. And I feel like there's so much conversation about foods and longevity where I'm sitting here kind of like, all right, everyone, we're once again, leaning on food to solve everything. And that is not the way to approach health.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to confirm, by longevity, you're talking about like lengthening of the lifespan?
Yeah. Lifespan, like living a long life. And I feel this is very much a male focused thing that I've noticed. Could be any gender, but that seems to be another piece that I've observed where suddenly if we're talking about extending lifespan, they're going to be talking like, oh, eat this certain way. And I'm again thinking we're putting way too much weight on food to be this saving grace for our health.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that as well. And I always find it so curious that like they remove weight from that conversation. Because if you look at who is living longer, it's actually folks who are in BMI categories that might not be seen as favorable in these health, wellness, fitness industries. And it's interesting that like that's the time where we're removing that from the conversation. And it's just so curious to me, like, why is weight the center of 90% of the conversations that are going on until we talk about longevity? And then it's like, no, but let's just gloss over that.
Oh, that's such a classic thing, right? Like we're going to bring up certain topics to benefit our own agenda and avoid things when there's conflict. So that's an interesting observation. I hadn't observed that before, but I'm sure that's the case. But yeah, bringing it back to fitness culture at the gym, I guess one question or one thing that I'd love for you to debunk for people is this concept of like earning your food at the gym.
Yes.
I think that would be really helpful for listeners to kind of just hear from you what you have to say.
There's a lot of layers that I could talk about this. So I'll take a stab and you let me know if this is going in the direction you think is most helpful. Earning your food is a really dangerous mindset. On a very surface, superficial level, we are learning from research, it simply does not work. There is no actual reality where like if you work out a certain amount, it's not going to have an impact. We're actually learning that there is less of an impact on the physical workout and one's shape, weight, appearance. So on a very superficial level, it's not really effective. But aside from that, this idea of earning food, it really goes against our primal drive for survival. And so what happens is when we adopt these conditional mindsets, our brains haven't really evolved all that much as a species, if you think about it. So you're now running the risk of activating fears of deprivation. I mean, there were periods of time where we had to eat more food because we needed to survive a long, harsh winter. And the irony is, if we're constantly adopting this mindset of like, I have to earn my food, we're actually significantly increasing the risk that we are going to completely dysregulate our eating and set ourselves up for either periods of out of control eating and or some serious health consequences. So I really, for so many reasons that we could dive deep on, I really would never recommend that to somebody, this idea of earning your food. And I recognize that's a departure from what I would have said in previous parts of my career. I just don't think it's a healthful way of living. I have literally never witnessed it help somebody achieve their goals in any industry. And I think it's just also really unfair. You deserve to eat. You deserve to eat the food that you want. Like you deserve to, it should be a basic human right. Access to food should be a basic human right. And I don't think we should have to earn it.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you sharing that. When it comes to people who are stuck in that mindset, what would you say is like some of the first steps they could take to start challenging that?
Definitely. And I also want to hold space for the fact that like starting is the hardest part. And I don't want to lose the importance of like the nuance here too, right? So it all starts with getting curious, right? Starting to question things even before you're ready to take the plunge. It could start as small as you would like it to. It could start with, I know in the industry when I was working in it, plus once I became a professional in this field, there's so many rules about exercise and what like counts as exercise. It could be as simple as getting started with healing yourself off of the treadmill a minute earlier than you normally would, right? It could start with decreasing a little bit that way. You might be somebody who's ready to take the full plunge and like stop exercising for a week and see what happens. I would really recommend getting curious about like self-compassion and adopting mantras of like, I deserve to eat, even if you don't believe it. A lot of times I hear differing opinions on this in my field. I happen to believe that you don't need motivation to recover. That's been kind of consistent with what I've seen in my practice over the last decade or so. But what you do need is the ability to what I would call go on autopilot, right? So feel the fear and do it anyway. And so when I think about that mantra of like, I deserve to eat, practicing telling yourself that, you don't have to fully believe that. The simple act of you repeating that to yourself is actually going to have a profound impact on your brain. Fancy term, we can restructure neural pathways, which basically means we can heal the brain with some of these things that we're doing, even if we're not fully bought in yet. So I would say, please know it starts with curiosity. That's actually one of the core values at Equip. It starts with curiosity. There is no step too small when getting started. There is no specific timeline. And that said, I will be transparent. Ironically, the harder you can push an eating disorder recovery, the faster that's going to get you to a recovered state. And that might not be realistic for everyone. So just getting started, just chipping away at that iceberg, getting curious, stepping up the treadmill a minute early, experimenting with a couple of bites of that like feared food, or experimenting with like having a couple bites of food without working out that day. Like get curious and see what feels right to you.
Mm-hmm. I take the same approach, right? Curiosity, setting goals that are manageable for you. Mm-hmm. Maybe they freak you out a little, but you're willing to do it, right? You're committed. You're committed. And they're like mini exposures in a way, which you gain the evidence that you can survive it and change. And I love what you said about mantras. Mm-hmm. I think that's one helpful. I know that's a tool I love, mantra work. And I always say the same thing. You don't have to 100% agree with the affirmations or the mantras that you're taking on. You just have to buy into them a little bit. So that maybe one day your brain will.
Exactly. And that's literally how that works with the science too. So it's true. Like once you literally get started with this and you can buy in enough to just say it even before you're fully, believing it, that's the work. Yeah. That's what you can do. Mm-hmm. which is so powerful. And I'll be honest with you, that was kind of part of my journey too, right? So I worked in the fitness industry. Then I began my professional career. Ironically, I was kind of naturally finding myself working in the eating disorder field pretty early on because of job availability. It was very serendipitous. And, you know, throughout my fitness career, I was starting to get curious of letting go of certain things. I was starting to get curious about what I categorized as a workout versus not. And I found even in my time in the industry, I continue to challenge those things, right? I might still be continuing to make different choices about food and eating. I did that for a number of years. It definitely helped sorting out my medical situation, getting more clarity with that. And again, I kind of earlier today talked about like this continual practice. I think challenging my own anti-fat bias, right? I think that is a continual practice. I don't think it's 100% you're at the end of the road. I think that's where that curiosity is important. So start anywhere. No, it doesn't have to be a perfect limit by a perfect set date. There's always room for continuing to stay curious and continuing this like evolving practice of what works for you in that chapter of your life.
Yes, I agree with you there. It's an evolution. We're never 100% done. Even the folks who are recovered or have made big transformations, there's always, you know, work that can be done, especially around unpacking that anti-fat bias and those thoughts and mindsets that have been super ingrained and are still kind of hammered in many different environments, such as the fitness environment.
100%. I think it's so important. It really is. You know, the more you learn, I consider myself a Hazeline practitioner now. And I think the more you learn, the more you realize the importance of that continual practice, the importance of that continual self-reflection.
Wow, what a major transformation you've made since your earlier days. I guess in order to wrap this up, I'm wondering, you know, if people are at the gym and they're starting to spot a lot of the signs and symptoms that we've talked about on this episode, maybe in a friend, what could they do to support them in getting the help they need?
Yeah. So I guess we'll talk about this from the lens of like a friend perspective first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Check in with your friends. See how they're doing. Maybe invite them to do something with you. Maybe invite them to do something different. I actually think friendship in the gym space is actually one of the most important and helpful tools we can use in eating disorder recovery. So if you are going to the gym working out with a friend, right? Getting away from that isolation, maybe stepping away from like solo workouts and getting into a class together. So pairing things together, but also like finding connection outside of the gym space. And then on your own, like if you're worried about your friend, it might also be a good idea to take an inventory of your own sorts of conversation, right? How much are we talking about shape and weight and eating and controlling these things? How much are we talking about things that we feel are unfavorable about our bodies, and just maybe changing the conversation, stepping away from conversations about food and eating, stepping away from conversations about shape and weight, you know, just on a regular basis of connection, like learning to connect outside of those topics, I think is really powerful.
Wow.
And last but not least, let direct communication. If you're really worried about someone, let them know. I think that's so important, right? I think because of our society being steeped in diet culture, there's so much of this, not only brushing over what we see, but also this praise for disordered eating habits. And just being that one person that's like, hey, I'm worried about you, can have a really powerful long-term impact.
That's really great advice. I especially love the reminder of direct communication. I think that's so hard. Like you can be direct and compassionate at the same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we talked about some themes of being women. I think sometimes directness is mislabeled as aggression, and that's not the case. I think there is absolutely space to be direct and compassionate, exactly as you said. And sometimes being direct is the most compassionate thing.
I'm such a direct conversational girl. I mean, you're a Northeast girl, probably part
in our blood.
In our roots. Yeah. So I've never had a huge issue with it, but I've seen so many people struggle. So the very helpful reminders. And you wanted to also share perspective, an alternative perspective, right? Of help through the lens of working at a gym. Was that?
Yeah. I guess just a takeaway for my colleagues who are in the fitness spaces, health wellness spaces, nutritional spaces. I would just recommend on your own, like staying curious and seeing if we could change the way we're having conversations. If it's in our classes, maybe departing from language, like no excuses, the pain is weakness, leaving the body thing. Maybe we could step away from that and really lean into positive reinforcement messages. Maybe we can step away from body focused conversations and integrate conversations about health as a whole. I would say like really just taking an inventory of the language that we're using with the clients that we're working with and seeing if there's room to tweak anything there. And last but not least, like I will say, even for physicians, training for physicians, even for therapists, training for eating disorders is so few and far between. Please do not blame yourself for not knowing about this. And I think the more we can educate ourselves, the better. And so it is on all of us and in the industry to be seeking out this education. And, I feel for everyone, it is extremely hard to come by, but know that there are resources out there. And I think that learning, that getting curious, like don't blame yourself for not knowing about it. And please know that every year that passes, there's more information available.
Amazing. I think it's so helpful to speak to those professionals too. So thank you so much, Brittany, for everything that you've shared today. For those who are interested in working with you or, through Equip, what can they do to get the help they need?
Yeah, absolutely. I highly recommend going to our website, Equip Health. On that website, there's going to be a lot of different features that you can look at. It'll tell you about the program. There's going to be some numbers that you can reach out to. We historically have not been a waitlist based program. We really do try to get everyone in as fast as we possibly can. Being in my current role now, I do mostly clinical supervision, so I don't do as much direct patient care. But what I can tell you is I am involved in supervision and some of the training of our clinicians here. And I do think Equip is unique in that we provide a level of training that isn't historically accessible in my field. So please know that you are in good hands. And again, we work with folks from all walks of life across the entire United States, all age groups. So yeah, reach out to Equip, give us a call. Sometimes I do seminars, so you can check out our website for that. And please know that, at least I could say confidently with my colleagues at Equip, you're in good hands and there's someone to help meet you where you're at, no matter where you are.
Awesome. One thing I really love about Equip is that it's one of the few completely online outpatient setups that like you show up and you have the professionals who are all trained and qualified ready to support you. You don't have to piece that team together. If you are really struggling to get things together, it can be really hard to do that. So I really admire the work that you guys do. And Brittany, this was such a fun interview. I love this topic. It needs to be talked about more in the eating disorder space. So I appreciate you. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having the conversation. And I so appreciate your time and having me on today. And I wish everyone, the best of luck who might be listening in, and stay curious.
So there you have it. Another episode of Full and Thriving in the books. I want to personally thank you for joining me in listening to today's show. And if you found value in this conversation, I would be so grateful if you could please take a moment to subscribe to the show and leave a review. Your support not only helps us reach more people who are striving to live their most full and thriving life, but it also allows us to bring on even more incredible guests with valuable insights that can change your life. Every follow, every review makes a huge difference, and together we can continue to grow this beautiful community. Thanks again for being a part of the journey, and we'll see you next time on Full and Thriving.